think like he did a PhD or something, even like got this theology. So I'm looking forward to it, and I love this topic. So like I'll be trying, if you want to talk a little bit about consciousness, although there's a lot going on in Israel,
Right.
and I
Well,
expanded base store also.
let me throw you out my first thought on the issue of consciousness. How could consciousness exist if there wasn't a God?
Well, I mean, just from a pure understanding, I mean, like a computer, the majority opinion of science is that somehow it arises from physical, electric, biological processes in our brain. And
Yeah, but how? I mean, the science, I mean, science has a very great way, and it's a very important discipline, obviously, but we're comparing apples and oranges here. I mean, science, for example, you could take a look at the workings of an eye, and you can see the cornea and the where the light reflects off the surface, and you can do a complete and intricate study of the physiology of the eye, which is a very important thing to do, but it still doesn't explain what happens and why beings can see. In other words, you have to have a God to explain that. You know what I mean? It's like the science explains the physical universe, but it cannot explain the phenomena that is not explainable. I mean, you can explain the human anatomy to a degree, and it's a fantastic thing to do. But science cannot explain the moment where life is breathed into something that makes it alive, as opposed to non-alive. So, I think that consciousness is in that same realm, because consciousness and the ability to reason are the elements of the human being that separate us from all other living beings on Earth. I mean, I don't want to talk about whether there's space aliens, that's another subject, but I'm talking about what we know. And, so the thing is that that's our ability to perceive nature. Consciousness is our ability to perceive the universe to the degree we can. That requires something that goes beyond physics, the materialistic physical examination that science is involved in.
I'm going to present that argument in my to the best of my ability, and this man Ben Watkins probably has a superior grasp of the philosophical terminology in the history of the philosophical debate. But I'll be arguing basically, and I spent really the last 3 years since I debated JF on evolution, I decided to dedicate a significant amount of time to returning to the studies of science, what I studied in university. And the last few months, I really pounding away. I've read like 50 books on cognitive psychology, neuropsychology, psychological evolution. And, so I'm going to hit hard and just say the science is not there. They've been predicting that they were going to solve this puzzle for decades, and they haven't. And then look at these models that how the computer works, and a lot of these modern models are basically trying to copy what the computer does, and in hope that somehow the brain would do the same function. Although the evidence seems that that's not there. And I'm also going to present basically Plato's form, which is similar to Anselm's ontological argument for God, but to say that even thought and ideas probably don't exist in the material realm. I mean, Plato gives the example of the circle. There's no perfect circles in the material realm, but we have the idea of the perfect circle, and the idea of the perfect circle is something that doesn't actually exist in the material realm. It's a function of the soul in the spiritual realm. And the most famous example, even the Hare Krishna Guru Ramapada preaches Plato on this, but I love Plato's explanation, Maimonides, through Aristotle, but chairs, or like a dog, that you have a concept of a chair that is a category for all chairs, even though you can't really precisely define what a chair is. And so from the Platonic forms, say that the concept of the chair doesn't exist in the material realm. It's something that exists in the spiritual realm. So I'm gonna make a progression of arguments, just like what you're saying, like, just a logical thinking person, consciousness isn't coming from our brain. And I'm going to even make an argument for dualism, that Plato was right that concepts arise from the spiritual realm.
I mean, I would also add to that Descartes' famous aphorism, cogito ergo
Cogito
sum,
ergo sum. Yeah, I
which
think therefore
means
I
I
am.
think, therefore I am. And he used the example of a ball of wax. The fact that he could perceive the wax means that he existed, because you would have to exist before you could perceive something. And by the way, Descartes was a devout Catholic. I mean, he wasn't, he was an Enlightenment figure. He was the father of, they say that he was the father of modern math and mathematics. But he viewed those sciences as a study of the nature of God's universe, and that both things exist, are not mutually exclusive, and that science doesn't have to prove consciousness. Science, it's not the business of science to prove consciousness. It's like asking a dentist to commit to and do a surgery. I mean, we all have different we put different titles on what our expertise is.
And it's
Science,
been like 100 years. Like, I mean, relatively, you think the power of a computer, like, thank God, I did very good in chess this week. I was playing for Israel, and I won some tournaments, and but the computer's so much better than me. And even like a computer you could get on a tiny bit of phone could just destroy me at chess, because
good,
computer and
but a
circuits
computer
don't
can't
operate.
think.
But the scientists were saying 100 years ago, when they first, evolution and the idea of the brain, that they were going to solve the mystery of how thought arises from the brain. And so I'll like, the brain is a
And they haven't
mechanism
done it.
for sense perception, like you said,
Yeah.
the eyes, even to say like the vision. What is the consciousness that I feel, the controller of my body? But if you took away free will and say, okay, free will is an illusion and doesn't exist. However, the concept that that the sense perception perceives the outside world and makes decisions on how to control the body based on the sense perception, and that is controlled in the brain. We knew that from dissections thousands of years ago, like the eye sockets. I was pre-med, and I took undergraduate anatomy. God forbid, we looked at corpses, and you could see in the brain, like the eye sockets in the brain, clearly sense perception, hearing, and the brain controls that,
The
and
brain is set up to do
motor
that, but yet we
sensation. But
still
even the
don't
thought
know.
or decision making,
Yeah.
like, should I lift this hand or that hand? We could know the how the signal that how it happens. The hand was moved, that there was a signal from the brain, but was there an eye that made that decision? And it's 100 years later that the scientists have been working on it, and they're still basically at ground zero. And they said, like, when I
They are,
debate Jeff,
and
it's like the
including the
heart.
understanding of the brain. And
We
both
could do an
things,
exact physical model of how
both
the
things
heart
are,
works.
can be seen as not mutually exclusive, in that you can have an automatic response. You can have an emotional response. Animals have that to things, but you also have the element which separates us from animals of consciousness and reason. We decide, we make conscious decisions that are based on free will. You can move your hand in different ways automatically, but you make a conscious decision when you issue a Hitler salute. I mean, I'm just saying that we, you know, as conscious beings, we make thousands, millions of decisions every day that
Even
involve use of reason and use of an accumulation of knowledge that we rest on, that goes back millennia, but yet that we interpret and that we analyze and that we apply in ways that benefit ourselves. You have to do that to get through a day. That's not automatic. It's like you choose coffee, or chocolate or vanilla ice cream. I mean, that's a conscious decision. It's not automatic. We all make these sorts of decisions based on very complex sets of reasons. Anyways, but Dooovid, let's talk a little bit about what's going on.
Would you mention real quick, I could plug my, tonight I'm going to do on my stream, and maybe I'll even do it regularly or semi-regularly, a Thursday night debate prep. And my friend Jennifer Sharp, who I think you're friends with on Facebook, who actually does my tech. She's the sound programming genius who produces the show for me.
Oh wow!
But she's also debating tomorrow night on Modern Day Debates, and she's like Hindu. She's defending pantheism with the 4-panel Christian atheist and agnostic.
Tell her I want to have her on my show, and maybe she can help me with some tech.
Well, I told her she should do that, but so tonight is 7:00. I'm going to do a debate prep where I'm going to go through the structure of some of these arguments and hopefully get back into it. So I'm up against kind of like a big gun. This guy has a
Mhm.
PhD, and this is what he does. He has his own podcast. So pretty
Well,
excited about that.
that's
But
good.
yeah, I
Where
mean,
can we,
we
where
should
can
talk
we
about
see that?
Israel.
Where can we see that?
On my Facebook and Twitter,
Okay.
the links are shared.
Excellent. So yes, good. Let's talk a little bit about the latest from Israel. I mean, as I see it, the Israelis have chosen not to really bring about a decisive victory against Hamas, because to do that, they would have to go into Gaza, and that would be very costly, both in terms of Israeli lives and Gazans. And instead, they're going to just go back to, in a sense, the status quo ante by destroying the tunnels. And my understanding is that they actually, I mean, I don't know if you can confirm this. I mean, it's been partially reported, but they kind of pulled a fast one on Hamas by letting the media think that they were about to invade Gaza. And so the Hamas, which have this incredible underground network that apparently goes, hundreds of miles, of threads almost the entire area, they were preparing for the Israeli invasion by going into their tunnels. And then Israel did not invade. Instead, they had these bunker busting bombs that they had been trying to get from the United States for many, many years, and that were released to them secretly by President Donald Trump in the last year of his office. And nobody knew they had them. And once the Hamas terrorists were all inside the tunnels, they were then able to go in with these bunker busters. They thread them. It's like putting a hot dog in a bun. And the bombs would go in and destroy the tunnels with the Hamas in it. Now, I understand that they did this, and that means that this is why they are trying to sue for peace right now, because they've really been seriously debilitated. And a lot of the problems with the destruction of buildings in Gaza has to do with the fact that buildings were built on top of these tunnels, and the tunnels are collapsing. But ultimately, my understanding and my sources on this are things like Debka file, which is, we can't know what's really going on, but it does get its information from Israeli intelligence, that they're going to just destroy the infrastructure of the tunnels without destroying the whole thing, because to do that, they'd have to go in, and they don't want to do that. It's too costly. And they're just going to then, there'll be peace, there'll be a ceasefire, and it's just going to be back to the same old, same old. I mean, they're basically going to then once again try to build up and recover their tunnels. And every so often, Israel will have to go back in and destroy the tunnels again. And it's just going to be like that, as opposed to the Israelis going in and having a complete and total victory and completely destroying this terrorist enemy. So that's my information. What's yours, Dooovid?
Yeah, I've been following pretty closely. I watched all the Jonathan Cornicus, the senior IDF
Yeah.
spokesperson interviews, and I've been reading quite a few different papers, and I've been following this for years. So I mean, without we could moralize on it later, but just the facts on the ground currently, the general Israeli playbook of how Israel would go about this would be to after Hamas's they crossed the line, they fired rockets at Tel Aviv, that complete victory means completely getting rid of the capacity of IDF to fire these rockets. And if that's even conceivable,
yeah.
It would require basically a ground campaign. It would require troops going through the various areas and trying to confiscate the military equipment, and it'd be almost near impossible because it's these huge areas of hundreds of thousands.
Well,
of
they
people.
could do it, but this would be a very costly.
I mean, you could argue that they could do it, saying like, no, I'm saying like
it would take a long time, and they would.
Well, I'm saying that would be a ground, like a war.
Yeah.
In a sense that how many Hamas would fight, how many weapons, and saying even with the military superiority, technology, and everything of Israel, the ground campaign
it would be costly for Israel, of course.
Well, even to say that Israel might not even win.
No, I think they would
war
win.
is war.
I mean, it
You
would
can
just
make
take
your
a long time.
predictions, but saying like complete victory, if you mean from God forbid, you mean the genocide of every
No,
single
of course not.
Palestinian or Arab in Gaza, or you mean the expulsion where you're just going to
Nobody
push these
means that.
people
So
past Israeli territory,
I'm really
and that's
shocked
going to
you
be.
suggest that. That's like left-wing propaganda. Nobody
No,
means
I'm not saying what
this
does
is
it mean complete
genocide.
victory.
What it means is going in, destroying the tunnels, taking out the missiles, and stopping the terrorists.
Yeah, but so that's
Doesn't mean
basically
killing anyone.
impossible. There is no.
It is possible. It just would be
It's not. I mean, I'm saying
take a long
practically,
time.
it would be like coming into Detroit, and I think Gaza's like about the same. It might about the same
No, it's
size.
not as big as Detroit.
Detroit's very big. Detroit has like
I know
90
it is.
something
I
square
don't
miles.
think Gaza is as big as Detroit.
But I'm saying it'd be like taking all the guns from African Americans in Detroit. It'd be near impossible. There's hundreds of thousands, and
Well,
maybe you could think you
I
would
don't
have the
think that I
military and
don't
the
think that
police.
would be
They're
the
going to go
goal.
house to
So
house.
I think it would be taking away. That's not what the goal would be. The goal would be to take away the aggressive weapons that can then hurt Israelis and kill and shoot into Israel. That's what they would have to do, including destroying the infrastructure. It's not confiscating every gun that a person has. It's
Well, I'm
going
saying the
in
rocket make
and doing the job, which would be to
just
destroy the
just
missiles,
a comparable
destroy the
from a
rockets,
military
destroy the tunnel.
From a military
And
point
that
of
could
view.
be done. It's just would be possible.
I mean that in your opinion, like
It
I
could
don't
be
even think
done.
most people in
So
Israel
what
think
they-
it could be done.
No, I think they do. Look, I've been reading a lot about this from people in Israel who understand that it could be done. It's just, it would be very
Well,
costly.
they want
for
it to be
Israelis.
done. They might be willing to sacrifice their kids'
And
life
they're not willing to
do it.
sacrifice it.
But I mean, just the prediction that they could successfully do
They're
it
not, look,
is
Dooovid,
at
we're
best
not-
a prediction. It's like even
no,
last
we're
time they
not-
weren't
we're
able to do
we're
it.
arguing against something here that we both agree. They apparently, and this is based on my sources, which is Debka file and other sources, they have decided not to do that. They're not going to go in and completely destroy the. I mean, look, they could drop.
Yeah, so you could give a narrative. You could say because they were scared, because they were scared and they knew they were going to lose. Is
No, it's
whatever
because
the
they don't want
narrative,
to
it doesn't matter.
sacrifice Jewish lives. That's why they're not doing it. The last time in 2014, when they went into Gaza, you had the death of 85 Israeli soldiers. That is very costly for a country like Israel. It's a very high price they would have to pay to do that job, and they don't want to pay it. And I totally respect that.
Yeah, they might lose.
But they could do it.
They might lose.
No, they wouldn't lose.
In your opinion.
No, by any.
Well, I mean, neither one of us could predict the future, but you're saying
No,
that
they would not lose. Of any normal projection, given the Israeli ability to do these things, indicates that they would not lose.
I mean, Israel isn't on ground force. Most people think that actually Gaza would probably beat Israel in terms of the military strategy, but in terms like if it's actually a ground-to-ground battle, that Hamas would probably beat the IDF. It's only because of the technology asymmetry.
Well, that's right. Israel has much superior technology. They have this, very well coordinated military. They've got intelligence. They've got everything.
Historically, Israel's performed very poorly in ground campaigns, even in Jenin a few years ago, in Lebanon. And most military experts thought that Israel lost the ground campaign in Lebanon, and even in Jenin a few years ago.
I feel uncomfortable even talking about this, Dooovid, because you and I are sitting here in the safety of the United States. We don't have to do these operations. We're not going to be asked to go into Gaza and risk our lives. I just want to move on to.
Well, I mean, you're the one who's so convinced that Israel would win, and I was saying,
right.
Not even the experts are so convinced.
No,
not even Israel. Even looking back, that you're saying like Lebanon,
I am
Jenin,
convinced that Israel would win it. I just don't think that the cost.
I mean, you could risk your own kids. You risk your own family.
Yeah, well, that's the problem. The cost is too high in terms of losing Israeli lives to do this job. So they are going to try to.
You might not have a choice, anyways. I mean, at some point, you may not. They might not have a choice, anyways. They're going to have to.
They will have.
They're going to have to fight. They're going to have to
No,
fight, and maybe Israel backs off the support, and Israel has to fight either way.
They might, if
God forbid, God forbid, like Hamas does not plan on living behind that wall long term. That sometime that wall is probably going to come down, and there could be mass war. God forbid, it could be casualties, hundreds of thousands
I
dead.
don't understand how Hamas is able to get a hold of those advanced weapons when they are ringed on three sides by the Israelis and one side by the Egyptians, and the Israelis have their navy off the coast blockading. How do they get all of their weapons through that?
Israeli incompetence. I mean,
Yeah,
boats,
it's astonishing.
scuba.
I
I
know.
mean,
Astonishing.
the expert that was speaking to the Michigan Jewish community talked about Hamas has special scuba operatives that
Yeah,
even
I don't doubt that. I don't
uh,
doubt that. It's astonishing. It's actually quite amazing that they're able to do this. And so, yeah, Israel's going to have to be stuck with the realities, as the Israelis like to say, the facts on the ground, which is that every so often, maybe every 2 or 3 years, they'll have to go back in and shoot shoot down these things and
with two
bring.
way. Look, you say just militarily, if America decided, God forbid, let's not help Israel out anymore, would Israel lose?
No, I don't
Would
think
they
so.
be able to drain
I don't
Iron
look.
Dome?
Yes, it
Would
would.
Iron
I
Dome
think that
get
Israel
drained?
would.
Would there be mass
Yeah,
damage? Would
I think they
Hamas be
would.
able to break down the wall in hundreds of thousands of armed, God forbid, insurgents from Gaza could kill hundreds of
No,
thousands of
to me, I
Israelis?
don't.
And you're saying how much is it dependent on help from the U.S.?
I think Israel would be fine without the U.S., but I do think the thing that worries me, and I've
Well, I
seen it.
say with the Iron Dome is I don't know the exact numbers, but Iron Dome is being depleted. So if it was a strategy from Iran,
So
a
they'll.
global campaign, you say let's do
Well,
slowly.
that's what
God
I was going
forbid
to say,
Gaza
Dooovid.
is going to
The thing
do
that worries
rockets to
me,
drain Iron Dome,
yeah, the thing
and
that
they're going to
worries
get
me is
pressure from
if
the
we
world so that
have
America
people
doesn't
like the
replenish
Turks
Iron
and
Dome.
the Iranians and everyone else, with Russia maybe getting together, and then you have a situation that looks a little bit like the Book of Revelations,
And it could be Russia. I
where
mean, if
you
you think
have
about it,
Gog and Magog, basically, as they say in St. John's book, ganging up on Israel. That's the thing that worries me. I
I mean,
think
what if it
Israel
turns out it's
would
Russia that's
fine
giving
to
these
be able
bombs
to
to
take care
Hamas?
of Gaza. I don't think that they'd have any problem doing that. And I don't think they necessarily need the United States that much involved. The only thing that could really be a threat to Israel, and by the way, it is a real thing, would be Turkey and Iran getting together with Russia and really, threatening deciding to threaten Israel. And I do think that is a major concern. I do think that could
Well, I mean,
happen.
the
And I
intelligence
think
is,
that
well, I'm
under
telling you, the
the
intelligence
Biden
is saying this is the
administration, now
plan.
that President Trump has been deposed, Israel is operating at a bit of a weaker position because there's instability now thanks to the removal of President Trump of weakness around the world. And that not only involves Israel now, and that's the manifestation of this new weak and internationalist oligarchic administration, but now there's also threats of war in terms of China possibly invading Taiwan this summer. There's a lot of information coming out of Taiwan, which seems to indicate that they're expecting a ratcheting up of military action as soon as this summer. You have France on the verge of a civil war right now. You have aggression the Iranians are totally ratcheting up now that they got John Kerry in there. And, there's instability around the world because we are not exercising leadership, at least at bare minimum, let alone operating from a position of peace through strength, which was the very brilliant policy that was implemented by Ronald Reagan and which actually goes back to the ideas of St. Thomas Aquinas. So I do
Let me
think
say
that
this
the
because it's
world
very
is much more
important.
dangerous
People
today
people
because
listening should understand. Like this is the intelligence coming from Israel, International, and Iran, and it kind of sounds like biblical prophecy, but relatively to what could happen in the narrative that we're fed here in the U.S. But if you're looking at a combined effort, like Charles said, that could be multiple forces, even though that's not what the intelligence is saying now, that the strategy is to just have a slow bombing campaign from Hamas. That's it, in order to draw overextended Israeli response, like it appears that Israel is doing, and to deplete Israel's Iron Dome, and at the same time to exert international pressure that the U.S. Decides not to give extra military aid to Israel as Hamas slowly, in a small tit for tat, maybe even going on for months, just tries to drain Israel's supply and turn international opinion. And Russia could be involved also, saying, for all we know, saying Israel, we don't know how they're getting all these rockets. We have some ideas, but it could be Russia even. It could be China.
Well,
But it's saying that at a certain point, if America doesn't replenish Israel's Iron Dome, then the rockets might start falling from Iran and Hezbollah and Syria. And so the strategy right now could be for a month or two, just a month or two of sustained small bombings into Israel to exert a negative international reaction.
Well, that's what Israel's trying to do right now by
drain Israel's military supplies.
Military.
And then you're going to see in a month or two, God forbid, there could be rockets coming from Lebanon, Syria, and Iran. And to some extent, this is a coordinated revenge of Israel for the killing of General Soleimani. That's a coordinated plan coming out of Iran, and it's planned to take months.
They can always find an excuse to invade Israel. What was their excuse before Soleimani?
I'm saying, will it work? What happens if they just keep doing this for a few months? They just say, Gaza, just keep on sending small rockets for a few months
right now
in order to get Israel to America not to replenish the supplies.
But they're going in and they're debilitating this genocidal enemy. But they're not. They're hoping to not have to do it without. And I want to get off this merry-go-round. They're hoping to not have to do it with a total invasion and a taking of it out. They're going to try to neutralize it, and I think that they are doing that. And I think that they'll replenish the Iron Dome. I mean, the United States, whether the
you think they will, you hope they will.
Yeah, whether the United States.
That's why you're streaming. That's why we're out here. But it's saying like Joe Biden.
Even if the United States and Biden doesn't do it, it'll get done because the Israelis have to find a way to do it, and they believe they will. They're very resourceful.
How are they going to get it done? Just from the fact. Reality is the U.S. like we talked about.
I believe
the
the Israelis are going to.
We could just start giving weapons, and you're saying could be Russia, which is like let's just give a whole bunch of weapons to Hamas, just for the hell of it.
Well, ironically, I think it should be noted that I think Biden just handed Hamas umpteen millions of dollars as part of this most recent.
So it's pressure. You're saying that there's pressure from Netanyahu and the political realm isn't working. So, the way that we do things, we're just going to give a whole bunch of weapons to Hamas.
I don't think that it's quite that bad. And plus, Hamas will be so debilitated, it'll take them 5 years to get back on their.
Hamas isn't really armed in the first place. I'm saying that Hamas is the first leg in what is going to be a regional war. That's going to be Syria and forces in Syria and Lebanon. So the Hamas
and by the way,
probably going to be
about half of the
goal
Arab
is just to drain Israel. So, Hamas has no
They
chance.
are siding with the state of Israel. So that is a change in terms of the dynamics of the last war. You have maybe some infrastructure left over from the amazing administration of Donald Trump, where Israel signed peace treaties with 4 Arab states and normalized relations.
Because the military-industrial complex, because Saudi Arabia is doing
continued.
Because Saudi Arabia is doing the exact same thing in Yemen.
By this administration to undo that. So this is
a
dynamic.
Factually, because Saudi Arabia is doing the exact same thing.
In the past, Israel had no support from Arab countries. Now they about almost, I understand, about 50-50. So there is a different dynamic. I think that the Trump administration policies are going to hold up in spite of enemies, both domestic and foreign, that would like to undo those policies. Now, the question before Israel now is, have they sufficiently debilitated the Hamas enemy to the point where, again, it's going to take them another 5 years before they're able to once again build back up militarily to the point where Israel will have to go in again. I mean, I think that that's where the whole situation is right now. And I also think that one piece of evidence that I have to convince me of that, as somebody who's an observer who doesn't understand the inside, nor do any of us, is the fact that I'm seeing in my own anecdotal universe here, that being social media, that being, Twitter, that being TikTok, that being, YouTube, I'm seeing the Jew haters really coming out and screeching all of these lies about Israel, engaging in cruel activities, which is a complete lie. And that tells me Israel is winning. They wouldn't be saying that if Jews were being killed and if Israel was on its heels. They're saying it because Israel's winning. And so I think that we are moving back toward, hopefully, God willing, at least a status quo ante, where again, both sides will rebuild, Israel will replenish, and the Hamas will replenish. And 4 or 5 years down the road, I mean, it is a kicking the can. They'll have to go at it again. I mean, that's unfortunately the reality. That's been the reality since 1948. And, in the meantime, we may have another brilliant administration like that of the Trump administration that could come along and start to really make some inroads in terms of developing peace. I mean, I personally think that had Trump been properly serving his second term, and I don't want to get too far into that because we're on YouTube, is the Palestinians would have not done this. Hamas would not have done it because they would have seen that there was a strong relationship between Israel and Washington, and they would have seen a strong administration in Washington, which would have brought them to the peace table. And I think they would have accepted, to a large extent, the Trump-Kushner peace plan, which was the very best peace plan that they have any right to expect after all of the ones that they've walked away from. And just to reiterate, that particular peace plan involved sovereignty for Judea and Samaria under Palestinian Authority and Gaza, a swapping of lands on both sides, and a condominium, if you will, for the Palestinian state in Jerusalem, and a superhighway or a train rail placed to connect Judea, Samaria, and Gaza. I mean, how could they possibly expect anything better than that? And also financial incentives. And I think that had Trump been reelected, we can't know history from hindsight, but I think we probably this year that would have happened. Now everything is falling apart because the new administration has been installed, and we have a return to the old days of this amoral ruling class. And it's sad, but Israel shall continue to press forward because they have to. If they don't, they won't survive. Anyway, Dooovid, what else do you want to talk about?
Well, I mean, just to mention, I mean, my interpretation, more skeptical and cynical, is what's happening now in Israel is somewhat basically, like, I mean, it was an article called like a showroom for military sales. And when Trump did the peace deal with Saudi Arabia, the agreement was that I mean, like the peace agreement with Israel and Palestine, but the main part that got them to do it was that America is now giving the same weapons that Israel is using in Gaza now to Saudi Arabia. And for a few years, basically, Saudi Arabia has been doing the exact same thing in Yemen that Israel is doing in Gaza with the exact same weapons. And not just Saudi Arabia and Yemen, but general arms sales. So from like the moralizing perspective, it's just like, okay, like there's a fight.
It's very troubling.
One guy plans on winning. I don't care if I'm right or wrong. If I'm wrong, I still want to win. And if I'm right, whatever the case was, like when it comes to military strategy or even violence or science in general, as I argue about consciousness, that really from the physical realm, you can't even explain why being dead is better than being alive, or why something like pain or suffering.
You're absolutely right.
Moralizing coming from a spiritual realm, but in terms, just the military strategy.
The U.S. gave AWACS to the Saudis back in the 70s. I mean, it's one of these strange kind of policies that all nations engage in. It's sort of under the cover, these huge arms sales and these trades. And, so the result is that, I mean, you're right. I mean, Israel is having to fend off probably weapons from Gaza that very well may have originated in the United States. It's very troubling.
I'm talking that Saudi Arabia, it hasn't been really too much in the news, but on a greater extent that Saudi Arabia has been doing in Yemen, the exact same
I
thing
don't
that
doubt
Israel's with the exact same American-made weapons, and
that.
the larger peace deals were, largely part of these military alignment, where the U.S. is saying that they're going to choose winners and losers
I
by
don't.
giving weapons to the people who could afford them or the winners, and then letting them use it against the losers. And you could say, oh, the winners were right and the losers were wrong. But it's moralizing. We talked about last week we laid out a path where they couldn't expect any better. But primarily people function by revenge, and there's an element that, in the Torah, in our own tradition, that dead bodies need to be avenged. People who get killed, and even like the Hamas,
That's why Israel tries to
most of
limit
these
the number
fighters,
of innocent people killed.
and even it's
They
like
try to tag it.
General Salmani is there's probably hundreds of thousands of people that feel that they have an obligation to wage war against Israel just because of the blood feud. So I mean, it's messianic, and I'm glad that you're optimistic about Israel. I mean, my thoughts with Israel, even if I'm pessimistic about, yeah, I think you might overrate the IDF's abilities. You might underrate the long-term group strategy of the Middle East, where I said that really Hamas, they can't, this slow push is probably designed to create bad media publicity, world feelings, and to drain and to drain Israel's military supplies. Maybe make
Okay, Dooovid, fine. That's been their strategy
as a precipice for the revenge that Iran wants to take for the murder of General Soleimani. So this is a slow, prolonged campaign
if it wasn't
that
that
Iran
one,
has
it
been
would've been-
planning since the murder of Soleimani,
but since the
and
murder-
it's just the
since
first
taking
prong, and it
under
might take
Mossadegh.
months. I'm predicting we're probably going to be on this first prong for another month or two of this just slow drizzle of internal Israeli, and the goal right now is to stop America giving weapons to Israel. And if they do that, you could see the bombs might start dropping from Syria and Hezbollah and Iran the next day.
Well, first of all, I mean, Iran is still trying to get revenge for the removal of Mossadegh in 1954. I mean, you could have a tit for tat going all the way back to the assassination of Ali, the third caliph. That's why they had a split between the Sunnis and the Shiites. I mean, that's just, you can't control that part of history. I mean, if they want to there's always an excuse for
COVID-19 also, because people are used to large casualties because of COVID-19 over the last year, and hundreds of thousands, millions of extra people dying, apparently randomly out of nowhere. It's somewhat cheapened the value of life. So in Gaza, if COVID-19 has been relatively small, but if it start rampaging and there's 100 people dying every day just from COVID-19, the people who would have fought but were scared because it probably would have cost them their life, if they figure that there's just, people are dropping dead from COVID-19 anyways, so I might as well fight for what I always believed in. And then you just say it's ethnic. I'm a Jew, I'm on the side of Israel, but saying if I was a Palestinian, maybe I would be Hamas.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, maybe they could go either way. I don't know if Hamas is going to increase its.
I mean, you can't see that. You say, okay, you're a Jew, obviously you're on the side of Israel, but if you were Palestinian, would you be Hamas?
Would I be Hamas?
Would you be supporting Hamas? Would you be signing up to fight for your people?
No, I don't think I would. I think I probably would either convert to Judaism if I wanted to stay in Israel.
You can't. It's illegal. You can't. I mean, it's illegal. We talked about that there is no path for Palestinians to convert to Judaism. It's against Israeli law.
Actually, you're wrong about that. I looked into that. I think that I would either do that, or I would, go to maybe one of the Gulf states and prosper in one of the other Arab states. I think this whole construct of.
Well, I'm a fighter. I would probably fight. And you're saying, okay, you're not a
I mean,
fighter. You expect Jews. You're the Jew, and you're not the fighter. You're saying, and you expect the Israel and the Jews to do the fighting. It's saying,
depends on what you're fighting for.
I just saying, I'm a Jew. I'm on the side of Israel. But if I was a Palestinian, I might be fighting for Hamas. Why not?
Wealthy, land-rich Arab states that stretch all the way from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific. There are plenty of areas that an Arab could do quite well. It's a matter of whether or not.
But it's about dignity and self-respect and standing up for yourself, even sacrificing your own life. God forbid, called dharma and duty.
Wealthy, oil-rich, superpower Arab and Muslim nations are extremely dignified.
I'm
There's
saying the
certain,
dignity of avenging the death of your brethren or avenging the
no,
loss of your land.
I mean,
Okay, like I'm part Native American. You're saying like crazy horse. They're saying like I honor the people who fought, not the people who surrendered.
well,
Like
something,
Trump likes winners. If I were a Palestinian,
I
I
suppose
would
so
probably be
that if you
fighting.
have a
God
small
forbid, and maybe
segment of
Israel
the
would just kill me like
population that is motivated by revenge because they feel that there was a war and somebody in their family was killed. And I sympathize to that. I mean, whether it be a brother or a relative, or if they feel that somehow Israel has usurped their land, even though Israel had no, they withdrew from Gaza. I mean, they handed Gaza over to the Palestinian Authority on a silver platter, basically. I mean, they stripped it. They made it Judenrein. They pulled out. They ethnically cleansed all the Jews from Gaza. People had to be, pulled out their businesses. If for some reason you feel like you cannot have a successful state in Gaza and turn that into the equivalent of the French Riviera, we're talking about beautiful beachfront property there, but you want to make war against Israel, well, fine. You're going to meet an enemy on the field, and Israel's going to fight back. Every sovereign nation has a right to defend the lives and the property of its people.
we talk
So,
about consciousness
if that's
in
going to
like an
fill you with a
animal.
desire to revenge because you're committing aggression against the state of Israel by firing 6,000 missiles into the country to try to kill as many Jews as possible and build terror tunnels and float over gas balloons to try to burn the fields, then you're going to meet an enemy who's going to fight back. And if that's going to fill you with revenge, tough noogies.
Well, I'm saying it's zero sum and saying that yes, it is going to be war and it is
Some
going to
people
escalate.
might feel revengeful. Other people
They're
may
saying all
think
people feel
that
revenge.
they
That's
should
what the Torah.
sue
They're
for
saying
peace.
revenge is a natural human inclination
Yeah, but
that
it's
all
also
people feel.
they feel it, but they may not necessarily decide rationally because we are images of God and we have the ability to reason. They may not decide to act on it. They may decide to channel that feeling into something constructive, like building a powerful and successful and peaceful state in Gaza, for example, which is an opportunity that's been handed to them. So, yeah, you're going to have some element. I would suggest it is not a good element of any people who are motivated by revenge. We could say the Native Americans in this country trying to get revenge for the wars that they lost against the early American government. At some point, you decide, well, I think we're going to build casinos. We're going to create what we have. We're going to make something out of our life. We can't go back to that. You're going to have always an element, but to kowtow to that and say, okay, we're going to, because people want to get revenge, we're going to throw up our hands. That's actually not dealing with the best interests of either side. But listen, Dooovid, I've got to run only because the show does stream live on YouTube, but I also download it to Gab and Rumble and Mind and brand new Tube.
We started later. It's only 40 minutes in.
And yeah, and they won't let me do it if I go too long. They reject it. So that's why I'm really no longer able to go the full hour. Anyway, Dooovid, thanks so much. I appreciate you having me on Monday to talk about my new book, The Satanic